So this video is going to be introducing a new series that I'm going to be working on the stories that we tell ourselves in our life and how they might affect certain ways of looking at things, how they might be wrong, and how they might either increase or decrease the quality of our life. Now, the stories we tell ourselves about our life might seem like a rather superficial thing, but it turns out evidence seems to suggest that stories are very much the way through which we process our life and are perhaps more important than the actual lived experiences of our life. So, to illustrate this, I'm going to read an excerpt from Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, from the chapter Life as a Story, which talks about a certain experiment where they kind of looked into this sort of thing more exactly. So his words are perhaps better than mine on the matter. The psychologist Ed Diner, and his students wondered whether duration, neglect, and the peak end rule would govern evaluations of entire lives. They used a short description of a life of a fictitious character called Jen, a never-married woman with no children who died instantly and painlessly in an automobile accident. In one version of Jen's story, she was extremely happy throughout her entire life, which lasted either 30 or 60 years. So they gave different vignettes to different groups. Enjoying her work, taking vacations, spending extra time with her friends, and on her hobbies. Another version added 5 years to Jen's life, who now died either when she was 35 or 65. The extra years were described as pleasant, but less so than before. After reading the schematic biography of Jen, each participant answered 2 questions. Taking her life as a whole, how desirable do you think Jen's life was? And how much total happiness or unhappiness would you say that Jen experienced in her life? The results provided clear evidence of both duration neglect and peak end effect. In between subject experiments, different participants saw different forms. Doubling the duration of Jen's life had no effect whatsoever on the desirability of her life or on the judgment of total happiness that Jen experienced. Clearly, her life was represented by a prototypical slice of time, not as a sequence of time slices. As a consequence, her total happiness was the happiness of a typical period of her lifetime, not the sum, or integral, of the happiness over the entire duration of her lifetime. As expected from this idea, Diener and his students also found less in more effect, a strong indication that an average prototype, in parentheses, has been more substituted for the sum. Adding 5 slightly happy years to a very happy life caused a substantial drop in evaluations of the total happiness of that life. At my urging, they also collected data on the effect of the extra 5 years in a within-subject experiment. Each participant made both judgments in immediate succession. So, in this one, it's important to emphasize they're judging both the 30 and the 35, the person who's being asked, which means that they will get to see the incongruity of their judgments, which wasn't the case as before. In spite of my long experience with judgment errors, I did not believe that reasonable people could say that adding 5 slightly happy years to a life would make it substantially worse. I was wrong. The intuition that the disappointing extra 5 years made the whole life worse was overwhelming. Okay. So, in this, we have a sort of... There's a story about Jen's life in this study. And it's the story of the life that really is the driving factor of how they are evaluating her life, because the story creates this prototypical slice, in terms of the way Kahneman articulates it, of her life. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at the slice. We're not looking at the actual lived experience of her life. And evidence just seems to suggest this is how we process our own lives a lot too. There was another study done by Dan Ariely, I believe, where it looked at they inflicted pain on the subjects, and the intensity of the pain, the way it worked was subjects were given like a minute and a half of pain, okay? And then they were given a minute and a half of pain, and then an extra 30 seconds of slightly less pain. And then they were asked which one would they prefer to experience again. And they chose the second one, the one that had more total pain. And the reason why, or the reason suggested why, is that their memory of the pain was that it was less intense as a consequence of there being the less intense stuff at the end, pain at the end, which suggests that they are processing it. They are taking the whole event and then they're remembering it in terms of this sort of like, what's it called? Not recency. Or yeah, it's recency effect. So what you experienced last, you're more likely to remember. They are processing the whole event through a lens that is paying too much emphasis, perhaps, to this end effect, where they are remembering the event as being less painful than it was. Okay? And so what this and the Gen experiment suggest is that we are really bad at evaluating the actual lived experience quality of our life. And instead what we do is we do it through heuristics. We do it through stories we tell ourselves about our life. And if this is the case, then the stories we tell ourselves become extremely important, right? And perhaps more important than the actual quality of our life, right? And this sort of thing, when I'm going to unpack it a little bit in some future things, in future videos, means that we are going to sort of underestimate the importance of things that just improve the quality of our lived experiences. So, for example, I've said this in a lot of places, increasing your sleep is really good. But it doesn't make for a good story, right? Being like, man, I got 8 hours, 5 days in a row. This is great. That's not a good story, right? What actually makes for a good story is stuff like, oh, I stayed up late, working real hard, like hustle, like all that type of stuff. No breaks. And this, it makes sense why those sorts of narratives are more appealing when you realize that storytelling and narrative about our life is going to be the primary lens through which we process our life, not actual concrete analysis of our lived experiences. And so I suppose this suggests two things that are perhaps worth keeping in mind or considering. One, we should evaluate the stories we tell ourselves and try and make sure that we are telling ourselves stories that are going to have good outcomes in terms of increasing the quality of our life or our perception of the quality of our life. So we want to have good stories. Two, we are likely to underestimate the importance of the quality of our lived experience. If we think that our lived experience is important, which I think we do, then that means we have to take special care to be wary of stories that cause us to neglect our lived experience as something that's important. And also, we have to try and either make systems that allow us to act on stuff that's going to improve our lived experience, or make stories that make lived experience considerations more important or valuable, like getting good sleep, like good nutrition, stuff that has to do with physiological health often just doesn't make for a particularly good story unless it's like a hustle, I work out all the time type of thing. Anyways, so some examples of stories I'm thinking about when I'm making this initial one is, I wake up at 6 a.m. because I'm a hustler, or 5 a.m. I'm a part of the 5 a.m. club. Like, what does that mean? And, the short answer to that is what time you wake up at doesn't give you more time in the day. But what the story implies is something like it does. What are the effects of having like such a story? Does it make you work harder? Like that type of thing. There's another story I'm considering is, that doesn't work on me, which is the type of story that people give about stuff like advertisement, where most people think advertisement doesn't work on them. Most people think that they're above average drivers. There's this type of if an effect is subtle or small, and this is the primary thrust of like that story, most people think that it just doesn't affect them, not that it has a subtle or small effect. And so, what are the impacts of something like that? How can you be wrong? And like that type of thing. These and I'm more than willing to open to suggestions about stories that people tell themselves about their life. Feel free to put that in the comments in terms of discussion. But I think that I want to emphasize it some more, but I've already emphasized it already, is that because we're processing our lives through our stories, that means that once you become aware of this, it changes the texture in which you should evaluate your life if you're trying to account for this type of bias. And also, you have perhaps two extremes in terms of looking at this sort of realization. You have one extreme, which I'm probably more close to this, which is no stories, don't like stories, stories are not substantive, and we like substance only, no style. And the way you present information to yourself is going to matter. The stories you tell yourself is going to matter. This is a bit of a problem. And then we have another type of person who's perhaps all about the story of their life. And, they only focus on the story, and they never focused on lived experience considerations, such as taking a multivitamin. It's the easiest thing to do in the world. A lot of people don't do it. Being deficient in a vitamin or mineral is terrible, a terrible look for a variety of things. Thinking your life is all about the story of your life really causes you to miss out on some potentially good opportunity, especially because when you are physiologically feeling bad, you are more likely to just interpret your life in a negative way. You are more likely to tell yourself a bad story about your life. And it won't be, if you're looking for a sort of truth regarding what's going on, the truth that your story is your life, this bad story, and that it encompasses your life, is being informed by the fact that you physiologically don't feel good, and that physiology has nothing to do with the story you're telling yourself. So the surface level, or the level at which our analysis occurs most of the time is story, and the level at which our story is informed by reality is reality, and then also just our physiology. And we just ignore this part, and we think we're only describing reality, not describing, when we're oh, nobody likes me, we think that we're describing, oh, no one liking us, not, oh, I had a couple bad experiences with some people I know today, and I'm really hungry and grumpy, so no one likes me. But if I wasn't hungry and grumpy, then I would just be oh, I'm having a bad day. The analysis it needs to occur at both levels perhaps, and if you just try and avoid the storytelling project, you are probably missing out, because that's going to be a key way you can communicate with yourself. And if you are all storytelling, then you're going to miss out on how the actual lived experience of your life is informing your experience of the stories. Anyways, discussion. Feel free to include any stories that you think would be interesting. Don't worry about necroing this video if you are watching it way later. But if you think a particular story is interesting, have at it. Particularly a story about your life that you can fit in one line or a YouTube video title. Feel free to do the algo stuff, like, comment, subscribe, and have a good day.